24 volt, 12 volt, perhaps you have a 48 volt hybrid inverter. You could have a rebranded one of these voltronic inverters, but are you sure you're getting the most amount when you've connected up your solar panels? So I found issues on my particular versions of my hybrid inverters that means that the voltage on the PV seems to stick. So it sounds like there's an algorithmic issue with it, and I've been trying to find a solution to it for quite a while now. As you can see on screen, there are a lot of these out there at the moment, MPPs, EASUNs. You can look pretty much through any of the AliExpress or Alibaba or whatever to see these inverters, and they've got different brands on. But I think it's all about the firmware, and I've been trying to look for firmware to fix the issue of where the PV input sticks, meaning you don't get your full power out of your panels. So you might have seen what I've seen, and I'm going to cover off what I've found in this video, so it might help you out. And if you have any feedback on finding the correct firmware for any of your inverters that you've been looking at and you've seen this problem already, please let us know in the comments below. So if ever you've done a search for any of these particular issues and you think you might have had issues with your PV input on your inverter, these are the kind of comments that have been seen on the forums, and I've been seeing these for quite some time now. But the problem I've been facing is I haven't wanted to actually try and find a firmware that's going to potentially brick or cause more problems than it's going to fix. Hence the reason I'm going to go through the process that I'm going to do and live with this at the moment until I can put my hands on a decent firmware. Time to go back in time a little bit to last summer, and I'll show you a comparison of a few days that were very similar in terms of solar back in July. So what I'll do is I'll clip back now till then, because I found a few days that are good for comparison purposes. So the 28th through to the 30th. So I just select those, and then that should come up here in Solar Assistant. So as you can see, I've got the 3 days there of reasonably good sun. There was a bit of cloud there on the 29th and a little bit of cloud on the 30th in the morning by the looks of it, but the rest of the days are tracking fairly well. So let's get rid of the others and just show you PV power on here to show you what it looks like. So these are 3 days in terms of what the PV power was. So this is obviously being watts. So on the 28th, it peaked somewhere in the region of about 1.19, almost 1.2 kilowatts. On the 29th, somewhere in the region of about 1.17, yeah. And on the 30th, which is the comparison day where I didn't reset it, about 1.09 looks like to be the peak there. So as you can see here, these 2 days right here, we've got 2 marks here which it's dropped down, and 1 mark there. So that mark around about 10 o'clock in the morning, and there about 10:30, 10:40 in the morning-ish is when I did the manual reset. So disconnected the PV connection, so effectively disconnected the panels from the inverter, and I didn't do it on the 30th because I wasn't able to manually disconnect on that day because I wasn't actually at home. So they're the differences there, and I'll just drill into these just to show you what the differences are. But just as an overall comparison here, let's have a look at battery power. So battery power, so this is again is in kilowatts. That's how much of this energy here from the PV makes it through the inverter right through into the battery itself. So on the 28th, again around the 1.1, I think 1.19 was there, I saw, yeah, 1.19, about 1.06 kilowatts gets to the actual battery, 1.07 there, I think you can see is probably about the peak that reached the battery. Similar for the 29th, which again was about 1.16-ish, 1.17. And about 1.06 kilowatts makes it to the battery. But you'll see on the 30th, again, very similar days, you can tell by the tracks of the PV itself. So that's why I tried to get days that were next to each other in terms for a comparison. So 1.09, and as you can see, only about 760 odd, 766 there looks like to be around the peak, actually made it to battery. So you can see that there's a fair difference there in terms of the fact that voltage makes a difference in terms of the way MPPT works. The voltage is more of a key to how much actually makes it into the battery. It's not as much to do with current, again, from what I've found using Solar Assistant for this. So here's the clear and obvious one here. Let's go into view that one a bit better. So this is the crux of the whole issue, really. So these are days here, as you can see, where I did a reset, a manual reset there on the 28th. I did a manual reset there on the 29th, again about the times I've already mentioned. As you can see, I didn't get round to doing the manual restart there because I wasn't actually at home to do it. So it stayed at that level, as you can see, all the way through the day, as flat as a tack. So again, that's actually impacted the amount of sort of PV that gets to the, or makes it to the battery as such. So if we go back and just show you the current as well. And the interesting thing about the current is where it's actually gone up, the current, obviously, so that it's trying its best to make the most out of the power that's coming in. So where the voltage is, obviously, it can do more with the voltage and less with the current. It actually produced more current on the day where the PV hit that plateau, as it did with, obviously, on the other days where it was bringing in more overall PV power in terms of watts, but it was actually using more of, or trying to use more of the current on the day where it was flatlined. So that's it. That's a more clear example. And again, it's shown here on the PV, or sorry, the battery current. So this is the battery current, similar to what the power that went in. So in terms of current, on the 28th, it was probably getting up to, oh, there it made 20 amps was going in at peak by the looks of it on the 28th. 29, again, similar to about 20 amps going in. And as you can see on the 30th, where I didn't reset it, it looks like the peak was around just 14 amps. So that's how much is making it into the battery. So what I'll do is I'll just drill in a bit closer on one of these. So if you go to the top on any of these, I can sort of drill down. Let's drill down on this one here. So you can just select it in Solar Assistant, that period that you want, and then it adjusts all the other graphs for you as well. Another handy thing with Solar Assistant as such. So here you can see what time I did the manual interruption to, you know, effectively disconnected the panels temporarily for a few seconds and then reconnected. So about 10:04, the power going in looks like it was about 755 watts. So again, that's a combination of volts and amps. And then once it's come back and it's readjusted itself, it's gone up to 837 watts. So again, nothing's really changed in that very short period of time, other than the fact that the MPPT is allowed to break this ceiling that it sits at, and it's gone up to the next level. So you can't really see it on this graph as well as you could as that comparison graph, but you can see that, you know, in terms of battery power, there's the change there. So it was at 659 watts getting, and then it's dropped up, sorry, gone up to 739. So that's how much has made it through on there. And here's a bit better look at that difference in voltage a bit closer up. So if we view that as a target, so this is the plateau that it hit here. It was sitting around the 110 volts part, 109, 110 volts, and obviously it has an initial peak up there when it's reconnected and the MPP is trying to find the best tracking point for the voltage. And then it's dropped back down to a standard level for the amount of panels, the 4 panels that I've got set up. It's sitting around the 130 as a standard. So it's gone up probably almost 20 volts in terms of usable PV voltage that you can use on that. And then I think where's the current gone? And the PV current, as you can see, actually drops off, because it's using more of the voltage. It's more efficient with the voltage than it is with the current. So the PV voltage is actually, the PV current's already dropped off. So that's evidence that, you know, it's using more of the voltage to get that power into the battery itself. So that's a sort of a quick example of the difference it makes, or it makes during summer. So what I'll do now is I'll switch over to see if I can show you something that's happened more recently. So let's see if we can go back to, let's find yesterday. Okay, so yesterday, if we go back, I think to the 30th, I think was a day that actually had some sun here in the south of the UK where I live. And here we go, we've got another one. So I'll show you an example of what it looks like during winter as well. So you can see it was actually a pretty good day in terms of, you know, started to get decent input right around pretty much all day. It was a reasonably sunny day all the way through, really. And the point at which I did a manual reset, actually doing it using the new method, which is using the grid interruption. So pretending it goes on grid to start using the grid to charge, which interrupts the PV. So I don't actually have to manually disconnect it anymore. I can just use it remotely, or do it remotely using the smart plug as I would normally charge it when I'm using cheap energy. So as you can see here, I'm going to drill into the time of the day I did it, just to show you again the contrast between this. So this is the overall PV power. So this is in sort of kilowatts or watts, if you like. So that's 1 kilowatt there. So before I did the reset, which was about, it looks like there, about 10:37 in the morning, it was at 963 watts. And then after that, it's gone up to just over a kilowatt, so 1.05 kilowatts. So you can see the increase there again. It's quite evident. And again, battery power as well. It's gone from getting to the battery again, 798 watts. And then after it's settled back down after reconnecting, it's gone up to 889 watts. So again, you've got a pretty good contrast there in the amount that's making it to the battery. So here again is just showing you moving it from one level to the other, and it's settled off again, settled off nicely. And again, the PV current drops slightly again, but it's got more range to work within that because it's working at a higher voltage range. So the overall PV power, as shown at the top, has jumped up as a result, even though the current's dropped down because it's more efficient. And here's the details here of where I actually hit the button or made the automation to use the smart plug, enabling it to quickly temporarily switch over to the grid. And then once it makes that connection, it disrupts the PV input, so it acts like me actually doing a manual disconnect of the panels, and it resets that. And obviously it's switched on for literally 30 seconds and then switches off again. And then once it's switched off again, it reconnects the PV input and then starts to bring the power in again at the higher level. So breaking that ceiling, breaking that PV volt ceiling, which is the issue they're trying to get around. So that is a tangible workaround even in winter for me. So if you did want to use something like Home Assistant, and as I've shown in previous videos, this is connected up and works alongside my solar assistant, you can set an automation up, which is what I'm going to take you through now. So it actually resets the PV input on its own. So I do that using the grid interruption method. So as I've already pointed out, if you put the grid on temporarily to start charging the battery, and again it's making the assumption you've got it in the right mode on your inverter, it does interrupt the PV input long enough for it to reconnect and then give you the full PV voltage range. So again, it depends what time of day you'll do that for your setup, and obviously how many panels you've got and the type of voltronic inverter that you've got. So I'm just going to quickly show you what I've set up. So I've called it Solar PV Reset. So as it probably says on the tin here, when the time is equal to 8:30, that's 8:30 AM, it's a fixed time every day. What it will do is it will go ahead and it will check, and this is where the and if piece comes in. It will check, this is obviously the device name for the inverter. It will see what the current PV voltage is at that moment in time, 8:30 AM. And I've put a range in here as well, because obviously, as you've seen already on the graphs, it can vary a little bit, and that may vary a bit more as we get into summer, but usually it hits its head somewhere between 100 and 120 volts from the PV input. What it does then is it just takes the main system, which again is what I've named my smart plug, which obviously connects up to my inverter, and it turns that on. And then what it does is it puts a delay in there of just 30 seconds, and I'll see if I can get that down, because obviously I don't want it to start charging from grid, because it takes that long for it to spin up. I don't want it charging from grid, so I may drop this down and tweak this whole setup, because again it's quite easy to tweak the voltages and the time as I get more into the summer months. But once it gets to that point, it then carries on to the next piece, and then it turns it off again. So that's my grid interrupt, if you like. So where it starts to think it's on grid, and then it switches itself off, switches off the automatic transfer switch, which normally provides bypass mode on the inverter itself, and then it reconnects the solar PV input. So that's really the quick and easy method that I've got for resetting that every day without me having to even think about it. So obviously that's going to be more effective on the sunnier days. I'm not going to be missing out on those valuable amps getting directly into the battery. So I'm going to show you quickly on my mobile phone how I would do it, or how you could potentially do it. It all depends on what kind of smart plug you've got, if you've got an app for that smart plug, and obviously if your inverter is directly connected to the grid in some form or other that could potentially use a smart plug or some other device to just start to charge or change the inverter to grid and then stop it interrupting the PV input. So as you can see, I've moved over to my mobile phone now, and I'm in the Tapo app because that's one of the smart plugs that I've got, and this is my main system. So I'll just click on that there, And this obviously gives you all the normal bits and pieces, and this will depend what you've got in terms of smart app and also the smart plug that you want to use. If you're going to use this sort of grid interrupt method to reset your PV input on your inverter. So in this case, instead of using Home Assistant, you could go in and say use schedule. So if I click on schedule, and then what we can do is just add a new schedule here, and I can put a sort of a time in place there. So if I wanted to replicate what I've done in Home Assistant, all I do is just go in there and basically just put that it comes on there every single day, and then, you know, I could save that there like so. And then what I could also do is then on every day I could also put something else in. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but again, you can set up schedules on your mobile phone if you like, or on your app that you've got. And you can also on here, I can do sunrise or sunset, but I'm not going to do that. But again, it's just as an example that at 8:31, for example, I could, you know, literally just switch it off so that I've got those two in there. So I've got that set up so that literally at 8:30 every day, 8:31 it will be switched off. Again, I'd probably want to make that, if I could, to the 30 seconds or less, so it doesn't start to try and start charging the battery at all. But again, it all depends on your particular setup, but that's just another option you might be able to use. So a quick and easy method to find out which inverter firmware you're running, and again, it doesn't really matter what one you're using. You just go down to the menu buttons, push up once, and I hope you can see that, and then it displays which firmware you're actually running on that inverter. So this is really the easiest method. And here's my EASUN 24 volt inverter, and again the same applies. Just find the up button there, push it once, and that's the firmware I'm running on this one. But I do urge caution, if you are looking to upgrade your firmware, just make sure you're 100% certain that it's the right one. Because again, I'm not messing around with them at the moment until I'm 100% sure myself that I've got the right ones for the inverters that I've got. So another method that you can use just to check your inverter firmware is just have a look under the product information section of the Watch Power app. So if you do connect up to your inverter directly from a laptop or such, then you can look at it in that section. So another quick and easy method to find out which inverter firmware you're running is using Solar Assistant. And if you haven't got Solar Assistant by now, I strongly recommend having a look at it. So you just click on the configuration tab and you scroll down to the inverter section as we've got here, click on settings, and there you have it. Firmware version is right there under specification. So I'm currently running 59.02 on my 48 volt EASUN inverter. So there you have it. I hope this video proved useful, and it may have highlighted an issue you didn't know you had. And let's hope that you get that extra boost over the summer where you might not have been getting it before. So if you do have any comments, questions or suggestions, or you've actually found the right firmware to actually fix this problem on your specific inverter, I'd love to hear from you in the section below. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned to DADvinci.